Welcome everybody in this panel discussion of the legal fest of Arzboni. This is the panel of making the move, taking your law degree abroad. I am here with Klemen Krec and Bartosz Frydel, who are two young talents, and they have in common that they both built a legal career in a country which is different from their home country, where they also took their first law degree. So welcome, Klemen and Bartosz. Happy to be here with you. And please tell us more about your journey, your current job, what you are doing now. How was the path leading to this? Whether you already knew during the university that you plan a legal career abroad, or the decision was born later. So please tell us about these things.
Bartosz, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, like it's up to you. If you want to start, you can start.
All right, so I can be, I think, rather quick. First of all, thank you for having us. As mentioned, so my name is Klemen Krec. I'm originally from Slovenia, now working in Luxembourg with Loyens & Loew, which is actually a Dutch law firm, but they have offices here in Luxembourg as well. And I am in the corporate department. So as mentioned, originally from Slovenia, I went to law school in Ljubljana. I had initially no kind of notions of necessarily going abroad. I just it's where my path took me. But I was always a bit curious about different legal areas and so forth. And then at a certain point, I got the opportunity to do my LLM in Frankfurt, which I chose to do because I was especially interested in financial law, and that particular LLM was generally quite good and also quite affordable, generally speaking. As you know, if you want to do an LLM, especially in the US or UK, it can be quite costly. So I did that, and then once I was doing that, a few other options opened up. I could do an internship. I did an internship at the German Stock Exchange, and then following my studies, also an internship at Banco Santander in their corporate investment banking department. And then, as it turned out, I went back again a bit to Slovenia, working for Šunher, which I think they're quite present in Hungary as well, and generally in the CE region. And while I was working for that, my girlfriend at the time got an offer for a position at the Court of Justice here in Luxembourg. And then kind of just followed love and whatnot and started looking for a position in Luxembourg, and ultimately finding a spot here with Loyens. So at that point, I think I think we're going to get into this a bit more detail later on, but the things that really kind of opened the door for me or enabled me to get a position here, there were a few. First of all, and I think Bartosz is going to go into a bit more detail as well, was the fact that I had some background with an international law firm, which is Šunher. I had a postgraduate LLM from a foreign country, in this case Germany, Frankfurt, and then all of this is intermittently. I also did an additional postgraduate in business in Leuven, which I think is also generally quite interesting for employers if you have a bit of an interdisciplinary background. And then the third factor, I think, that kind of opened some doors here for me was the fact that I was generally fluent in German at the time. So I was, in addition to English, which I think is a must if you're looking to go abroad, it's always good to have some additional language capacities as well. Although here in Luxembourg, actually, the predominant language in practice is French. So this is my story in brief, and I think we can go into a bit more detail for the bits and pieces. But for now, I hand the word over to Bartosz.
Yeah, that's very interesting what you said, because I think my story is pretty much very similar. So I did my law school in Poland, then I did my qualification to the bar also in Poland. I had a pretty good job, and I was really pretty satisfied with my career. And actually, I never wanted to work abroad. And I remember all of my friends saying that they want to, move to Germany, the Netherlands, whatever. And I was always saying, because at the end, it's the easiest in your home country. And also you can, let's say, also when it comes to your position in society, it's easier to somehow be the elite of your own country rather than somewhere abroad. But at some point, like after our final exams, after I qualified as an attorney, which takes 3 years after or even 4 years after law school, I was just feeling that there's something missing, that I just wanted to elevate my career to the next level. And for that, I need an LLM. And very interesting point that Klemen also mentioned, of course, LLMs in the UK or in the USA are incredibly expensive. I was also looking for cheaper, yet still good and competitive alternatives. And I found my LLM in Berlin, at the University of Berlin, dealing partly, at least, exactly what I wanted to do. Because like I was interested both in the energy sector and also in state aid law. I did this LLM. Then, of course, I started liking living abroad because there are some extra challenges and it's simply interesting to not live in your home country. And I was looking for other opportunities. Then I got to the European Commission. I did my Blue Book traineeship with DG Comp in the UNIC, dealing exactly with what I wanted to do, so with state aid in the energy sector. So it was really like 100% match. And thereafter, yeah, I got disappointed with Brussels. I knew I didn't want to work in Brussels. And I started looking for jobs back in Berlin when I had new friends, which is also pretty close to my hometown in Poland. So it's it's also pretty convenient. And this is pretty much it. And thereafter, I will share some of the main points that you should consider when considering working abroad. But I think the main point that I wanted to raise, don't worry if you are like now 18, 24 or 30. I think there's always a moment to take this decision and move to another country if you want.
Yeah, thank you. So, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it would be much better when we just talk about our experience. So yeah, so from my side, like my free speech is over.
Yeah, that's interesting that actually none of you started from the very beginning that I am going abroad, because I know a lot of people who from the very beginning are really just having this in mind. So, and thanks for adding this, that in any age you can actually decide. But if you already mentioned that you prepared some guidance to the people who consider taking their career abroad, would you share it with us now, and then we can discuss, and Klemen can also add his ideas?
Yeah, so I'll just give me, I think this is this one, yeah. Okay,
so
so
it's really nice to have it in a structured way.
Yeah, this is actually pretty interesting because, you know, like we are, I think like neither me nor Klemen, we are not the only, you know, like the only Pole working in Germany. Klemen is not the only Slovenian working in Luxembourg, but still, I already had the chance to give in different contexts some small lectures on this. So I already before had some 6 points that, can you see these points actually?
Yeah.
Okay, exactly, that I think are useful. So first of all, I think you need to have already some good CV in your home country, because you will be always disadvantaged as compared to people that are from the country where you want to work, you know? So like even if you're one, or we're always good at university and so on, there were also many Germans that were also very good at university. Germans or nationals of another country when you want to move. So we have to be really outstanding and emphasize how good you are in what you're doing to increase your chances. And then the point that Klemen mentioned, you need to know the language of the country you're going to work in. And interestingly, Klemen, do you speak French?
I do now, more or less.
Okay.
It's a work in progress, but I didn't when I came to Luxembourg. But Luxembourg is a bit of a specific destination in the sense that here both German and French are quite relevant. So that's why I think there's often many lawyers here that speak only one or the other.
Exactly, and this is very interesting point, because I think it's not always necessary to speak the language, the official language of that country. You need to speak language simply that is useful in business, right? So for example, in Poland, we have so much foreign investments, foreign investors, is I think you could pretty much also work only in English as a lawyer, right? So, and in Germany, on the other hand, this country has very strong own business, so the business language is German. So you need to speak German if you want to work in Germany. The case of Belgium, right? You don't need to speak Dutch or French. Business language in Brussels, at least in competition law, is English, right? So this is the research you need to do and just try to figure out which language is being spoken at law firms, or maybe not spoken, but in which language are the legal services provided. The third point, it's always good to have some link with the country you're going to move in, because people want to see that you have a real interest in working in this specific country. The next point I wrote, so this, the point 3 was in the context of people who were actually doing an LLM here in Germany, and I wanted to say them, if you do this LLM, if you build this link with this country by doing an LLM here, then try to do something already, take some professional steps already during your studies, so that you do not lose time thereafter to look. Yeah, what kind of links? Maybe, so it was the link I made, yeah? So the link I mean here was studying, doing an LLM in this country. But other links I could imagine is, for example, that you would go for, let's say, a secondment to this country, right? So you are still, let's say you're still working in Hungary, and then you're trying to get a secondment in the country where you want to move in, let's say 3 months or whatever, yeah? And then this already a link with this destination country, answering the question from the chat. Then the 5th point, this is also interesting that Klemen did the same. So I did the traineeship with the Commission. Klemen did the traineeship with the German Stock Exchange. And it always matters. And you're very lucky because if you are from Hungary, you are European citizens, and all the European institutions are open to you, which is not the case for many lawyers from outside the EU. And the 6th step I mentioned on this slide is that you need to simply apply for jobs. And it will be a very exhausting process, but you have to think about this and about a project that you need to complete and think strategically. So for example, what I did, I think the main piece of advice that I would say is one of the most valuable I have today. I never applied directly to the HR department, yeah, when applying for a job position. I was always applying directly to the partners I could imagine I could work with. And the reason for that is that I believe that sometimes it's simply easy for people working in HR department to reject your application just because you do not meet some formal requirements, while the partner that exactly knows what they need can better judge how useful can you be for the law firm. So this my piece of advice: apply directly to partners at the law firms or at the companies where you want to work for, even if it can come across as weird or unusual. Yeah, this is more or less the 5 steps.
Maybe that I can chip in a bit here. So I think it's quite important to emphasize, although I definitely generally agree with the steps. If you'll do all, I think you definitely have much better chances of securing that position. But at the same time, it always depends, right? Each case is different, so you may not need one or the other, whatever the case may be. And also, you know, sometimes there are shortcuts. For instance, in my example, when I did the LLM, I did it specifically at the Institute for Law and Finance in Frankfurt. And the LLM itself was mostly in English at the time, but it obviously gave me an opportunity to be and study in Frankfurt. So I got that link. And then in the context of the LLM, we had internship programs that were kind of secured or helped, or the faculty helped facilitate them to some degree, right? You still had to send in applications and whatnot, but obviously it was easier to get them because the faculty was in the background through and through, and they had established connections with law firms, and in this case also the German stock exchange where I did my internship. So I immediately kind of ticked two points off of the list. And then also the link, right? If I later, and I did then also have a position, as I mentioned, with the Banco Santander in Frankfurt, I already had this link with Frankfurt and already had an internship there. And ultimately, if I wanted to, I could have stayed in Frankfurt because of it. So often, if you're looking for, if you already have a set destination in mind, which is that's great, right? You know where you want to end up. This is also an option you can look at, see what the postgraduate programs there are, if there are any internship opportunities in that context. And often, just talking with professors, once you are at a program that perhaps doesn't offer internship possibilities, they often also have ways in. But I think unless you're targeting the US or the UK, unless of course you have the funds or the means necessary to go study there, right? It's quite achievable, I think, in Europe in general, if you go by way of postgraduate studies first and then make your way off of that. Would be yeah, I think that's from my end of things here.
So if my understanding is correct, you both recommend people that they do their first degree at home, they have some cool professional experience in their home country to build a strong CV, and then go for an LLM study, some postgraduate studies abroad, and then start to build the links and take an internship in a reputable institution or something like this you mentioned, Bartosz, so like the German Stock Exchange or some European institution. And my understanding is that you both obtained a strong specialization during your studies already in your home country. So what do you think about this? That would you have any advice about selecting the specialization? Because I see that Bartosz is in state aid law competition, which is kind of an European international field, and Klemen is also in banking and finance, if I understand correctly. So based on the stock exchange.
I'm in corporate now because I kind of pivoted a bit into corporate. One important kind of point to realize here is, and to be realistic, right? We are not on equal footing here with people that are already in those jurisdictions, right? You're not going to get the position if you're equal to your competition. You have to be better. That's the reality. So a specialization is one way of doing that. And when you mention, like, if you can, it's definitely possible to get directly into that jurisdiction, but that's usually the way to do that is to do your bachelor studies there. If you do your bachelor studies already in the target jurisdiction, then you should have no problem securing a position. But most of us weren't in that kind of type of situation. For most of us, it was postgraduate studies. And in that case, it makes it much easier if you have some sort of strong foundation, a year, 2, 3 in a certain specialization area. And then if you did the postgraduate studies from that specialization area, you're gonna have a great chance of securing a position in that jurisdiction, in my view. Bartosz,
No, like I totally agree with you, but maybe building on what you have just said, 2 extra points. So, like, first of all, you mentioned before that each case is different, and this is indeed true. And now referring to Barbara's question, whether it's better to just study in your home country and then do the postgraduate studies, it also depends, because, for example, let's say that you are bilingual, right? And you are, let's say, Hungarian of German origin, right? So maybe if you're more or less native in German also, maybe it's better to move already for your law school, not the postgraduate studies abroad. So you have to always think what are your strengths and like what are your simply, like what compare yourself to others that plan this career. If you have some already advantages like being a native speaker in more than one language, then this is already something that you need to consider. But another point that you mentioned was also interesting. Sorry, I think now I forgot. Yeah, exactly. When it comes to yourself comparing with others, right? So like for me, one of the disadvantages, let's say the scenario when you are not a native speaker in another language and you do not want to go to the law school in this foreign country. If you do a bachelor, it would be pretty difficult to be as good, to have the same great notes and same good performance as nationals of this country. Although we are following the same track as nationals of this country. That's saying that at the end, you can end up having, let's say, lower chances to get a good position because you will be competing with other Germans. Yeah? So, for example, I know also there are some people from abroad that were born, let's say, in Ukraine, Syria, and many other countries, and they moved here, but at the end, studying not in your own language is super difficult. And in the end, sometimes they do not end up with very great notes and they do not have chances to get to good lawyers because in Germany, for example, they really look at the notes. Yes. So for me, in my case, it was much better to come here as a foreign lawyer because just I'm not competing in the same league as Germans. I'm competing in a bit, like weird league that is not defined and has its own challenges, but I'm not competing with them so directly. It will be my thought on this.
Maybe.
Yeah, I see.
Oh, sorry. Just one more point I kind of thought of right now. I know, each case is a bit different. Some people have a target destination already set in stone, but if you don't, and that's for those people that don't, and you just kind of are a bit, adventurous or want to have this experience and whatnot, then I would, I think a very good advice is also you be mindful of the market you are applying to, right? There are markets that are very open to foreign lawyers and market that are less so. And also just in the point of economics, right? To be very specific, right now, for instance, the London market and New York are, very closed off, generally speaking, and highly saturated. Same, I believe, in Frankfurt to some degree. Whereas, for instance, here in Luxembourg and in Brussels, as I understand, right, it's quite open. So they're searching for people generally. So obviously, you're going to have a greater chance of getting into there. So that's for kind of the people that are a bit more open. Don't be discouraged if your first destination isn't working out. If you just want to go abroad, or even just think it of as a stepping stone, if you will, to maybe get later on at to a certain position somewhere else. There are other markets within the EU, especially where you could focus your attention to. Yeah.
That's interesting what you just said. And what do you think how the law student or a young lawyer can figure out which markets are the more open and which are more closed? Because it's also changing somewhat with the time, I would say. What would be your recommendation?
Well, one way is just to simply kind of look at the job openings. There are various websites and whatnot, just kind of headhunters and whatnot that constantly post about these things. And for instance, if you looked at London for the past 3 years, I would say, 3 or 2 years back, you had constant posts about hirings in London, and now everything has dried up due to Brexit and other stuff as well, right? And in US, we know why. Just because generally now the visas are being blocked and whatnot. Whereas now, for instance, Luxembourg explicitly said that they want to increase their population up to 1 million people in the near future, right? And currently they're at 700,000. And they have a severe shortage of labor when it comes to in the finance profession in general. So that goes anything from the big four in accounting to law firms and whatnot. So some countries are quite explicit about it, like Luxembourg, some less so. So just generally, I would advise do your diligence, search for it, and and see what pops up. But yeah, at this moment, I would say that two main jurisdictions here in the EU that are searching for people are Luxembourg, Brussels, and then to some degree, I believe Amsterdam as well. But I think there you would need to speak Dutch, although they're developing also, as I understand, kind of parallel structures just for English-speaking lawyers and English-speaking or English-driven procedures, actually. But I'm not much of a Dutch lawyer, so you would need to look that up for yourselves. But I understand that to be the case, yeah.
Yeah, but this is also another point that you mentioned is that I would say that there are no jurisdictions that are always open for any field of law, because there are some fields of law that are simply not open. Let's think of maybe inheritance law, right? Or something like very, very national that is barely, for example, open to European harmonization. So automatically it would mean that for a European lawyer, it will be more difficult to practice in this field. Or maybe litigation. So in most jurisdictions, litigation is taking place in the official language of this country, and you need to be, let's say, very good in like speaking the foreign language. So I can't imagine myself pleading in the court in German. And there's something also that you need to consider. So some fields of law, some areas of law are much more difficult than the others.
Yeah, that's a super valid point, actually, that you mentioned there. So I would 100% agree. So if you look at litigation, as you mentioned, it's going to generally, you can consider it off limits unless, yeah, you're completely fluent in the local language and qualified, right? Because often when you're talking about transactional practices, a lot of law firms are fine with you not having the bar when you apply or slowly getting to that point, right? Whereas if you're doing litigation, you're going to have the bar from the onset, or at least some sort of formal recognition in that country. Often many countries have stepping stones to the full-fledged bar. You're kind of a trainee attorney and so on, but you need to have that status. So I agree that with 100%. And then also you kind of have to weigh for yourself. What is more important to me if you're interested in litigation, unless you really fill those specific requirements, you're probably going to have to give that up if you want to go abroad and maybe focus more into a transactional practice, which is more achievable. And then on that front, you really have two areas of going. One is EU law, which is super useful or convenient for us EU lawyers, generally speaking, right? You have a lot of EU institutions, and you are on equal footing with all EU citizens. And then alternatively, transactional practices, where a lot of countries, for instance, I know in Germany that's the case, and I was at the time when I was thinking of staying in Germany, for instance, I was in discussion for a transactional lawyer position in Frankfurt. A lot of law firms in Germany offer that. So even if you don't yet have a qualification or even don't speak the language necessarily, at the time my German was so-so, but it's possible to start as a transactional lawyer and then get your language skills and later on qualification and become a fully fledged lawyer. So in that sense, I would say in terms of focus, either EU law or transactional practices.
That's cool. So you say that there are some practices which are generally closed for foreigners, like inheritance and litigation you mentioned, and there are these more open areas like EU law and transactional law. Could you mention anything else? I mean, like Bartosz, you are in competition law and state aid, we can consider it part of EU law. But so it is like someone considering taking their career abroad should already consider during the university selecting the right specialization, right? This means kind of that.
I would say so. So I mean, of course, there are always extraordinary situations and examples, right? So it's always possible that you will be able to practice in a very, very narrow and very national field of law. But now I don't have in mind, to be honest, like many good examples of such people that followed this even more difficult path.
But maybe on that point, don't want to give the impression that you only have to do contract law if you want to be abroad. Like, for instance, in my specific example, I'm in the corporate M&A department, which on the one hand means, sure, I do transactional work, although to be fair, somewhat limited here in Luxembourg because it's a holding jurisdiction. But I do a lot of corporate law, which means, actually doing, you have the statutes here in Luxembourg on the general corporate provisions. You do research, you look at jurisprudence, you look at doctrine, you look at precedents and whatnot, which is very classic national law, right, to some degree. And then you have the EU layers on top of it, which, there's more and more EU law on the subject of companies law in general. And then once you start talking about listed entities, for instance, which is also something I work with, then you have a lot of direct EU law applicable, right? So it doesn't mean just contract work, but it's a good way in, so to say. But litigation itself, it's generally is off limits unless you really have a perfect command of the local language.
Yeah, I fully agree.
How did you find the field which works for you, and what would you recommend to those who are not really finding their field, or they are interested in more than one field?
Like I'm always giving like very, very general piece of advice. So I think what is difficult with our job is that sometimes we do not see tangible effects of our work, so I'm always giving an example, let's say, of construction workers or architects. At the end, they, see the building that is built, that is simply constructed, and it's there. With our job, it's not so easy. Sometimes you just produce documents, and after 5 years, you learn that, something was bad written, and there's some dispute, because of your contract. So what I would say, you just need to sort of think what brings you a bit joy in your life, because you can have joy. You can also, have satisfaction with your job. And this is something what I would be looking for if I had problems with choosing my field. It's a very general note, but I think there are no, I don't know any better answer.
I can speak just from, I suppose, my experience. I was always generally just very interested by the different fields of law. And initially what I was more, specific, especially interested in was litigation and white collar, which is also what my first internships included. And then at a certain point, like I think after a year or so, after working for actually a very good lawyer for white collar back home in Slovenia, at a certain point he brings this file. Previously I had this kind of so many pages for a matter to work on, and then he comes in and gives me like a very small file and says, all right, there you go, work on that. And it was a corporate dispute, right? Or not really a dispute, it was a merger file, essentially, very small section of it. And I saw, all right, that seems interesting. And then I kind of just went into that's how kind of the decision came to pass that I want to do a postgraduate studies in a bit more corporate finance orientated, and then I took off from there. But initially, just as a general piece of advice, I would just say, especially if you're in your early 20s, try different things. If you, even locally, whilst you're still in the country, try different things, see what piques your interest, which is also why I personally, for instance, my internships are all quite different, from white collar to regulatory to just corporate. And then ultimately I saw, corporate is super interesting for me personally. I find it very intellectually stimulating, and is how I ended up here. And actually, when I got to Luxembourg, I had the opportunity to either go into corporate or investment management. And at that time, I was already decided, yeah.
Okay, so I still have a lot of questions, but we started to have questions from the audience, and I would like to give preference to their questions. So I will read these 2 questions that we get by now, and I encourage them to ask more questions. So what type of tasks do you do as a junior competition lawyer working abroad? Is there a downside that you only know the EU standards, but not necessarily familiar with the national law positions on consumer protection?
Yes, I think this question is more for me.
Definitely, yes.
I don't, like, first of all, like, I wouldn't call myself, I mean, it's very nice that you say that we are young professionals, but I'm 32. So like, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm still like a junior lawyer. This is another case, like in Germany, lawyers usually start their career very late because of this qualification process. So I actually started at from the same levels in the same age as Germans, right? Are there any downsides? To be honest, I can say about, like merger control or abuse of dominant position and so on, because this is not what I do. I do clearly state aid. Of course, there are some downsides. So, for example, in German, there is something called Zuwendungsrecht, so something like internal subsidy control. Yeah. So sometimes like one problem need to be analyzed both from the point of view of state aid law and this internal subsidy control law. And I don't know this law. But then, is it really, as you call it, downside? Because you have to always, this is something what you always do in state aid law, this balancing test at the end, whether there are more positive effects than negative. On the other hand, I'm fluent in 3 languages. And for me, I'm just much more used to working in 3 languages at once than my bosses that also, for example, speak some other languages, but they always work in German. So my big advantage is that when I look at the European pieces of legislation, I always compare English, German, and Polish version. And actually, I can come to very, very different conclusions than my bosses, because simply I compared more language versions. So I would say, of course, there will be always some downsides because we don't know the local jurisdiction, the laws from the jurisdiction, but also there are some positive sides of that. I'm thinking if I can come up with another example of some downsides. Yes, I mean, of course, so sometimes when we are analyzing, let's say, for example, the energy market structure in Germany, of course, this structure is very similar to the European structure, but there are some aspects specific only to Germany. But is it really complicated that I don't know them? I wouldn't say so, because, and what I really appreciate in my bosses, and I think it's pretty common when you are a foreign associate, they also understand that you do not know much about the national law. That's why if there is like any problem, something that you need to understand from national law, they would simply explain to you. And after all, our legal tradition across Europe is very similar when it comes to continental Europe. I assume in Hungary, it's also like in Poland, a bit mix of German and French law. So some civil law constructions in German law are very, very similar to Polish ones. So sometimes it's really enough just to have an idea of how something in a given jurisdiction can work. So I wouldn't call it a huge downside. I don't know, does it answer your question? Yeah, like this person didn't write her name.
Maybe just to add to that, Bartosz, I would mention that, it's the law. Even after you did your bachelor's, you don't know the law by heart, and even if you do, it changes within half a year or a year usually. You're not gonna know the local law, but in most cases, the local people don't either, right? When you have a problem, you need to do the research, you need to look at the law, you need to ask the right questions. So I don't think that's a major disadvantage. There's a bit more of a learning curve, of course. It takes a bit of time. You're gonna be slower probably at the first year or so than your fellow associates, but other than that, I don't think it's too big of a drawback, and people are, in my view, overly concerned about it, generally speaking, and that goes for law firms as well. They're looking to hire associates when thinking, oh, this guy didn't have a bachelor's degree from here. I don't think it matters if you have the thought processes in check, right? If you know the principles, you're gonna get there. It's just at that point, it's a matter of effort, not of prior knowledge, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe just because your question is about competition law. So if you were to practice competition law in Brussels, then it doesn't matter at all. Because in Brussels, everyone is from elsewhere. So if Brussels is your destination place, then also don't worry even more about this.
Then we got a new question. There was a previous question, but it relates to the application processes, and the new question relates to the field. So I will ask this first. What are your thoughts on the legal tech field and on specializing in either digital law or corporate law? Who wants to start?
I suppose I can. The legal tech field. Oh, that's a very broad one. What are your thoughts on the legal tech field? I'm not sure whether that means AI or specializing in AI regulation. Not sure.
Actually, both. This person is asking about both digital law and legal tech and corporate.
Yeah.
So...
Okay. Generally on legal tech, use it. I saw, for instance, I see in law firms, they're actively stimulating their employees to use as much tech as possible. They are fully aware that this is the future. So, be well versed on it. So don't, because eventually, a lot of work, at least simple work that we're doing now, is going to be able to be streamlined significantly. So at that point, what's going to be required of you is not to draft a simple document, but to strategically think about it, why and how to approach problems is going to be much more important. And then specializing in actual digital law, I suppose that's more from GDPR, automated decision making and whatnot. To be honest, I don't know what this field is going to look like and how, if it's a good opportunity or not. So I wouldn't really dare to give advice on it. As regards corporate law, that I can give advice on. I think it's a good field. I think it's a good field to specialize in, generally speaking. But if you're just looking to go abroad and you don't care about it that much, I think there are better ones. For instance, banking and finance, transactional banking and finance. Like one thing, I have a colleague here in my law firm who mentioned that at a certain point he thought about going to London, and because in Luxembourg funds are the big thing. Luxembourg has I think the most investment funds in the EU, and that's the massive driver of business here. And then when he had some interviews in London, the thing they were most interested in was, oh, you have experience in fund finance, right? Because they don't do that. And just generally speaking, if you do banking and finance, you mostly do transactional work, which is very kind of translatable into other jurisdictions. But corporate law, I think it's great. I would, but I am biased. So
yeah, maybe I can elaborate in turn more or on legal tech and digital law. So, of course, I do not have hard data. We cannot predict future, but I know examples of people who follow this path. I would say in legal tech, there are many big law firms, mostly American and British law firms, looking for people who are, let's say, legal operations managers. And as part of that, you also need to be good in legal tech. I know personally, so a friend of mine, he worked in Brussels first for Linklaters, and then he worked for Coca-Cola. Exactly, he's a lawyer, Polish trained, not qualified, but he studied in Poland and then specialized in legal tech, and yes, he does work abroad in this field. When it comes to digital law, I also know simply examples of people who decided to go for GDPR mostly. But now, because of the new regulations that are coming, like as the AI Act, right? Yes, they are also starting getting specialized in these pieces of legislation. So at least for now, and at least judging on these two examples, yes, this is pretty much possible, I would say.
I would agree on that. I left competition law to work in legal tech and digital laws, and I work abroad, being born in Hungary. Now I'm in Barcelona. My colleagues are mostly in Germany, so it is a very international field. So I think it is a good field, both the digital law and or legal tech. I combine it, but there are a lot going on in this field with IP, with privacy, with the AI Act side, and legal tech is really a broad thing now. And there is a question directly to Klemen. You mentioned that you changed from having working experience in one field in Slovenia into another field abroad, corporate. Could you talk a bit more about switching both fields and countries? Did you change both around the same time? How, if at all, could you leverage having a different, both in terms of geography and field, in the application process into corporate?
Yes, I started in litigation, but then I kind of already started pivoting into more transactional and financial law before applying abroad. And as I mentioned, I did the LLM, which was a financial LLM. Then I came back after the internships, and when I was working at Schönherr, I know I have like a bit of a confusing journey. I went to abroad, then back home, and then abroad again. So maybe it's a bit difficult to keep track of where I've been at what time. But essentially, I did the LLM, got a bit of internship experience, then got back home in Slovenia. And at that point, I was working with Schönherr in their transactional or financial regulatory practice, right? So at that point, I was quite orientated into corporate and banking and financial law. And when I applied to Luxembourg, I had some experience already in corporate. It wasn't a lot. It was at that point, I think it was 10 months or so. But then I also had the academic background. So it's always going to be easier to already switch positions whilst you're still in your home jurisdiction. So if you have that option, I would recommend to take advantage of it. On the one hand, you're going to see if you're really interested in that field or not. And then it's going to give you also the basis to make the move later on. So that would be my advice on it.
So now this question half led us to the application-related questions, which is the question of Sarah. From your experience and the ones around you, how seriously are taken the easy application on LinkedIn by the recruiters? I am one of the persons who has submitted thousands of applications, and there is no results on this kind of applications. You were also mentioning that the applications is the kind of tough part of the equation also.
Exactly. So I think I would need to better understand what are the positions you are applying for. But still, this LinkedIn, I have never applied on LinkedIn, I think. But so based on experience of my friends, they all had the same story. So 0 answers or 1% of answers. That's why I would simply try alternatives, like applying directly to people you want to work with. If let's say, okay, corporate, okay, but do you want to, if you can write in chat, are you interested more in law firms or companies as an in-house lawyer? Sarah. Because if you're interested, for example, not in law firms, but in companies, then okay, you have experience both. Why shouldn't you simply find on LinkedIn a person that is, let's say, head of legal right, at the company? Or why you shouldn't just find on LinkedIn or just Google a partner that does banking in the country you want to work in, right? So it will be my piece of advice. Rather try both, but yeah, usually applying on LinkedIn is simply difficult. I know, Klemen, it's also very, very important, very valid, but very general question.
I tend to agree with you. I don't think it's the ideal approach because it's very standardized, right? And you know, we discussed this at a certain different point, Bartosz and I. You know, his approach is to reach out directly to partners, which I agree with. I think it's a great approach. And mine would be, you know, to make your applications personal. For instance, when I was applying here to Luxembourg, I expressly mentioned, you know, my girlfriend at the time, she got a position. This is my personal reason why I'm looking to go to Luxembourg. You know, it also gives them insight, you know, why am I leaving the law firm with which I've been only for 10 months, you know, and I explained that. So, you know, whatever your personal story may be, at the other end, there's also, you know, a person that's looking over 20, 30, 40, 100 applications. So all of whom are probably very well qualified, just as you. So you have to make yourself stand out somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also very, very good piece of advice. So maybe something so when I did my LLM here, I already worked part-time as an in-house lawyer in the company, and I had very good relations with my boss. And once she told me that she's getting thousands of applications from people from abroad, and she doesn't understand at all why these people are actually applying, because they're based in a totally different country, but they apply to Berlin. And she was always asking herself, like, are these people really interested in this job, or they simply just give it a try? So I think what Klemen said is also very wise. So show them that you are consciously, you want to apply to this specific country, to this specific company, because otherwise your application will simply disappear, right? And you would be the easiest person to reject, because when you have no link whatsoever with this jurisdiction. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that this counts a lot, whether you apply for a law firm or for another type of company. And this has a lot of difference, because I mean, LinkedIn applications has their own secrets, which is a different study on its own, like how you optimize for the algorithm. Because, for example, most of the big companies are checking your CV with an algorithm, and if the keywords are not found, you are out in 0 seconds. So because my current position is in tech, and I got it through LinkedIn. So, but it has its own secret. Law firms have their own secrets. European institutions have their own secrets. So you should be really knowing what you want, and you really have to go after this, I would say. Sorry, she wrote something.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I can again, because
okay.
I live sorry because I know I speak a lot. So I work in Berlin, and you can imagine there's like huge Turkish community. I have many Turkish friends, and they're also not non-EU citizens, right? And it's very, very true. If they were to apply from Turkey to Europe, it would be way more difficult. So that's why I think even for the non-European people, this is even more important to move first, for example, for a postgraduate program or another opportunity, because then you get okay, I'm not an expert in migration law, but from what I learned from my friends, then you get the student's visa. And then after this visa, you have at least in Germany, sort of like an extra permit for job seeking visa, it's called. So this is what I would reply to you. So yes, I admit, and this is not fair, and I know, but this is even more difficult for non-EU candidates. And that's why you need to put even more effort into building a valid link with this country. And yes, I think it's always much easier to apply when you are already here. And when, for example, like show in the application documents that you have an address here, because it means it shows that you are already, you can, let's say, work, or for example, this process to get the work permit would be faster compared to people who are still abroad. But this is huge issue, I know.
Yeah, the administrative obstacles is another topic. I mean, there are a lot of administrative obstacles to be in a law firm if you come from another European country, but if you come from another non-EU country, let's say, then it is even more obstacles. I mean, can you mention a couple of them, because you both work for law firms, and what administrative processes you had to go through, like you have to recognize your degree, or how it exactly works?
So I think, yeah, here, this is the advantage of being an EU national, right? For me, it was essentially nothing. You apply, you get the position, you find an apartment, you register yourself at the local commune here, and off you go. Obviously, you send in, if that depends somewhat on the law firm, of course, what kind of verifications they want to do. But it was rather straightforward. But yeah, of course, yeah, as Bartosz mentioned, if you're a non-EU national, it's to be honest, I imagine it's a nightmare. I've had also friends in Frankfurt who were, for instance, I had a good friend from Belgrade. And yes, it's, you know, and there's, you know, you're not sure whether you're going to have that visa extension, if you're going to be able to stay. And then once you get into one country, you're limited to, you know, going to the next, and so on. So yeah, it's I as I understand, it's basically the same as going to the US in terms of difficulty. No.
Yeah, exactly. However, do not also get Sarah discouraged, because I think like both me and Klemen, we know.
Yes, sorry about that. I was a bit too much of a downer there.
No, like I think I was more discouraging than you.
Sorry,
but what I'm saying, like we know many examples of people from all around the world that work here, and so this is very, very possible, and just a bit more burdensome. And when it comes, Barbara, to your question, no, if you are EU citizen, it's super easy.
Maybe just to add to that on a bit more positive note, I had in my LLM in Frankfurt, I had a significant amount of people or colleagues who were from abroad. I would say probably at least a third, if not more. Most of whom were then able to stay in one way or another. So I still have friends who are still to this day in Frankfurt. So I did it in 2020, and they got their positions, and at the time now, one I know is in a law firm, or a couple actually, and then in investment funds and whatnot. So it's definitely doable, but in that case, yeah, as Bartosz mentioned, it's usually much easier if you go via the student visa route, as was the case with all of my friends in Frankfurt.
Just one more administration related, well, it is not only administration. How big of a downside is it if you are not admitted to the bar of the foreign country you are aiming to work in? Is it a plus if you are admitted to the bar in your own country?
Maybe I can kick us off here, Bartosz. I think the main thing is here, it depends on the jurisdiction. Generally speaking, if you're a EU national and you have your home country qualification, you're going to be able to passport it, essentially, right? You're gonna be able to have it recognized. And I need to double check this, but I know that is the case at least here in Luxembourg and back home as well. So if you are qualified in one EU member state and you're a national of EU national, you come here, you make an application to have your license recognized. And then for a period of 3 years, you are on here, it's called the so-called list 4. And then after 3 years, you get a fully fledged qualification, local qualification, even if you didn't pass the local bar, right? You're in all terms equal to the lawyers that did. Now, I think that this is so I definitely know the passporting generally is an EU requirement. So that is that if you have an EU qualification, you can have it be deemed equal in all countries, but I'm not sure whether all countries enable to get the full local qualification as well. But I know that is the case, at least here in Luxembourg and in Slovenia as well. And then in my case, maybe just one last thing I would mention. I didn't have a qualification when I got here, and what I did was the English bar. And then if you do the English bar, you can get it passported. Now that they're following Brexit, you can get it passported to Ireland rather easily. So I also now have the Irish bar. And then with the Irish bar, you can have it recognized anywhere in the EU, right? So that's one way of going about it, not necessarily even doing the local. So I didn't do the Luxembourg bar. Yet I can be a fully fledged Luxembourg lawyer here eventually. So in 3 years, to be exact.
Yeah, exactly. So this is so there are actually 2 European directives on practicing abroad. So just look them up in Google, and it's pretty useful to understand more or less how this process works across Europe. And your Klemen experience with doing this England ways qualification, then going to Ireland, this is actually a very good way also for non-EU citizens. So for non-EU citizens, it's actually the only way, without, of course, like when you know only English, or English is the strongest foreign language, this is a very good way to get European qualification. So all of my Turkish friends, they also follow this path.
Thank you. So I can see that there are differences in this, that there are countries which offer the full qualification, and I don't know, we are a couple of minutes over. I would like to ask just one more questions in general, but if someone has a very important question, then I would still give them the chance to ask it. My question is about the cultural differences, because there are the administrative obstacles, but there are also that the legal culture is not the same in even one European country than in the other. How did you face this? What are your experiences? How are the CE legal professionals are considered in other countries? What would you say about this?
All right, I can kick us off here as well. So for me personally, I would say, if we're talking continental jurisdictions, you're generally gonna be well positioned to practice the way you've been practicing. The Code Civil, for instance, is very similar to the Austrian civil code that there was, and the German BGB. It's the fundamentals are the same essentially. The legal culture, I would say the main differences, especially if you are from countries more towards the Balkan side of things, it's a bit more rigid in the sense, rules orientated. It's not, we're just gonna wing it left and right. Like it's there is this kind of a bit, I would say, perhaps more respect for the law. So which is a good thing if you're a lawyer, right? So that's been my experience, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I would just add that yes, of course, you will maybe every day in the beginning experience some differences, not only when it comes to the legal culture, but when it comes to culture in general, like when it comes to how relationships are built at law firms, the relationship with clients and everything. So this is, of course, very different, or to some extent different, but this is something you just agree to in the beginning. So when you decide to work abroad, you have to just agree that there will be some extra difficulties, but I would say this is simply very rewarding because you learn something new. And also what is for me helpful is that people here also, of course, have lots of understanding that I'm not German native speaker and I'm not trained here, right? So for example, like clients, they don't care if I make a mistake, and if I use a wrong preposition, they care whether I say something meaningful or not. Exactly.
So thanks for all the super interesting and useful advices and insights. It seems like that we haven't received new question, just using the opportunity. So thanks a lot for all the great conversation and for the advices. And I think this was the last panel discussion of the Legal Fest, but I am aware that there are some interesting safaris. So follow Ars Boni's website for more events and news. And thanks a lot, Klemen and Bartosz, for the conversation and for your advices and insights. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for having us, of course, and best of luck to everyone applying abroad.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Yeah.